Hello and welcome. I'm B Muse, the Crafting Muse, and this is the WizKids D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures Gelatinous Cube tutorial for our Take and Paint event. I'm very excited to walk you through this step-by-step process. If you are new to miniature painting, you are very much welcome here. I can't wait to show you how it's all done. First, let's take a look at the supplies, the paints, and the miniatures you're going to want for this. Here are the supplies you'll want to be sure you have on hand. First of all, you want to have a paper plate. That's going to be handy to use as a paint palette for you. If you happen to have a small plastic cup around, that will be helpful as well. However, you can use your paper plate in its place if you don't. Along with that, you want some paper towels. I always recommend 2 to 3 sheets, as well as some paint brushes in various styles and sizes. You definitely want to be sure for this project you have a large flat paintbrush, a small flat paintbrush, as well as a fine round point paintbrush. Then be sure you have 2 cups of water. This is 2 individual cups, each mixed with a little bit of dish soap to help with flow and rinsing your brushes. And finally, especially with this project, newspaper for your table surface. I'll be using paints from Vallejo. However, use the paints you have available to you that are comparable to what's being shown. First up, we have silver, which is a very pale silver. Next is Chainmail silver, and that is a medium mid-tone silver. Then there's Tinny Tin, and that is a nice dark copper. Along with that, you'll want Khaki, which is a dark tan, Bonewhite, a nice ivory, and then we have the washes, and you want to be sure you have these washes. It's a blue wash, green wash, Umber wash, which is a brown wash, and finally you're going to want to have a gloss, varnish, or seal coat for minis for this to be a successful result. This miniature comes in 2 pieces. You have the classic outer cube, and then there's the insert that's portraying the cube's lovely snacks. For the wash, I will be using both green and blue on this gelatinous cube. If you want to have some fun and try a different color combo, by all means, go for it. Before we get started with the tutorial itself, I do want to talk about the fact that this does involve washes. This isn't something you can sub out unless you're using inks. So please make sure you have washes on hand. If you don't, you're either going to end up with an opaque cube because you're using paints, or it's going to be streaky and it's not going to have the results that you're seeing in the pictures that are going to be involved in this video. That being said, I am also using green and blue in this tutorial to give us the classic gelatinous cube look. If you want to do something yourself that's a little bit different, fantastic, I love it. I'm always the one who's, painting Umber Hulks to look like jewel beetles. So I'm all for doing something different, but I want you to keep your cools and your warms in color, especially when it comes to washes and inks, because when they blend together, they will do something called muddy, or they will turn brown essentially. So if you're looking to do different colors than what I'm doing, just make sure that you're using colors that are in the cool grouping or in the warm grouping. This means, example, red and yellow are great together. Those are very warm tones. Purple and blue are great together because they tend to stay in the cool tones. If you were to try and do something like blue and orange, I can guarantee you, as soon as you get that blue into the orange zone, it's going to turn brown on you. So please be aware of the colors that you want to opt for if you're not going to be using the green and blue like I'm using in the tutorial to get the classic gelatinous cube coloring. All right, are you ready to get this started? Because I am. Let's go. Side note, if you have a little cup laying around, you can put that to use for holding your washes. If not, you can still use your plate. You may find it helps though to tip the plate to one side so the wash doesn't spread out on you. If anything, it helps it pool into the side of the plate. First, we're going to work the green wash on the upper portion of the cube with a large flat brush. This means the top and the upper half of the sides. You don't want to be too heavy-handed as we're going to apply this in thin layers for better, more consistent coverage. If it goes on too thick, it will collect and puddle, and that won't be such a great look when all is said and done. Once you have the cube addressed, shift over to the insert while the cube dries. Just like the cube, you want to apply this green to the upper portions of the plumes and stop about halfway down. Thin coat here as well, and don't worry too much about getting the wash onto the skeletons and the weapons, as we will be painting over them in a bit. Set the insert to the side to dry after its first round of wash as well. You'll notice the wash clouds as it dries, and this is okay. Not to worry, we're going to counteract that cloudy film in a bit, but for now, let's keep going with this. We're back to the cube, and we're going to put on the second layer of green. Again, as before, keep this layer thin and don't let the wash collect and puddle on you. You will find it helps to hold it by pressing your fingers on the inside of the cube instead of trying to hold on to the sides, because as soon as you're going to touch the sides, you'll start pulling off the wash with your fingertips. Same thing for the insert. Get that second layer of green wash on the upper portion. Also make sure to rinse your brush before moving on. With the insert drying, go to the cube, and now we're going to work with the blue wash from the bottom up to the middle area. You can even feather the wash into the green zone to start to blend the two colors into each other. Once you finish with the cube, go back to the insert and do the same thing. Be sure with the insert that you are also working the wash around the inside as well as around the base. Okay, so this next tip might be a little bit odd to put in a painting tutorial, but I do want to address the fact that if for some reason you don't like how your miniature came out, you can strip your minis, and that is very easily done with rubbing alcohol. You just need to be sure that it's at 70% at the very least, and what you need to do is just put your mini into the rubbing alcohol, let it soak. I usually do for about a minute because I find that's a good amount of time. Then you go in with a toothbrush. Please be sure it's not the one you use. I really hope that doesn't need to be said, but you never know. Go in with a clean toothbrush, one you've never used before, and you can scrub away the paint that you have put onto the miniature. You're then going to need to be sure you go back with some dish soap and wash your miniature off, because the oils on your hands can sometimes affect how the paint will adhere to the miniature after you are done stripping a mini. So that's something you can keep in mind. But another little thing to also be aware of is that sometimes you will hit this point when you're painting your miniature. You may not be nuts about it, but by the time you get to the end of the process, it's a completely different outcome than what you were expecting. So that's just something to keep in mind as you go along. Finally, you will go in for one last round with the green on the cube only this time. You're going to coat the cube entirely with the green from top to bottom, side to side. And this is going to blend the two different wash colors together so you get this great vivid green down to blue effect. Okay, at this point you do need to be sure that your mini dries, especially because these washes need time to adhere to the plastic. And if you start doing work and it's not dry yet, the result won't be great. So what I want you to do is get up and move around. Trust me, I get it. It is very easy to get into the zone and get very zen about painting your mini, but you do need to take care of yourself too in process. So I'd like you to get up, move around, go get yourself a drink, preferably water. Hydration is great and wonderful and everything like that. You can even have a snack. Give this about 10 minutes and then come back together and keep going with the process. But definitely take a break and make sure those washes have a chance to dry. I'll see you in a bit. As mentioned before, the wash will cloud as it dries. To fix this and get it back to a more transparent look, all you need to do is apply a gloss varnish to your cube. This is why this is critical to this project. I'm personally using Vallejo's, but if you have another on hand, you are free to use that. The important part is that it is a gloss finish. Any other finish won't counteract this haze as much as this will. Be sure to apply this over every angle and side of the cube. Don't be too heavy-handed though with the application though. You want to be sure this isn't collecting or puddling as well, just like you were making sure before with the washes. Once covered, set the cube aside and we're going to move over to the insert. Keep in mind we're not gloss coating the insert yet. I'm going in and using very classic colors for these weapons, but again, this is your mini. This is going on your table. If there are other colors you want to use, please, by all means, feel free to do it. If you want to make everything bronze, go for it. If you want to have a gold sword in there, that's actually pretty cool. Go ahead and make a gold sword. My whole point in this is that you don't have to use the exact paints I am using in this part of the process. You can have a little fun, or you can substitute in should you not have this kind of paint at home. So please feel free to have a little bit of creativity here and do what you'd like to do with the paints on your weapons. For the skeletons, I mean, bone is bone. You could go in with a light gray if you wanted to make it more like a weathered bone that's been sitting outside for a very long time, but it's in the splorchy goodness, so I don't know if that would actually be the case. But still, enjoy what paints you're using and use what you have available to you. Just because I'm saying I'm using this, it doesn't mean you have to. I'm going to be using the color Khaki on the skull and bones. I am applying this also with a fine point brush. We're going to go in and give these bones some color. If you do not have this particular color, a light tan or even a beige will do. Think old bone colors for this bit. You want to carefully apply this to the skulls emerging out of the plumes, as well as onto the different bone lakes that are sticking out as well. Also, you're going to apply this color to that axe handle. After the bones, we're going to get that big old shield, and in this case, for the color I'm using Tinny Tin. However, feel free to use whatever color you want. Carefully edge around the shield, doing your best not to get this onto the plume surface area. And then what's easier to do is to fill that in once you've sort of outlined around the shield itself. After the shield, then move on to the handles of the dagger and the sword and give those some color as well. Now we're going to jump on over to Chainmail Silver to get those two blades and the head of the axe. Really, any silver color will do the trick as long as it's a mid to a dark color silver. Like the other spots, just be careful about keeping the silver on the blades and off the plume surface area. We're moving into a technique that is used quite often in miniature painting, and this is something called dry brushing. If you are unfamiliar with it, it's basically using a flat brush, dipping it into some paint, removing a good amount of that paint onto a paper towel, and then you drag it across the texture of a miniature to bring out the texture and highlight it, essentially. However, one tip I always give, especially for new painters, is when you want to try out the paint load on your brush after blotting it off on the paper towel, you can use the inside of your wrist because your wrist has all this fantastic texture to it and your skin responds very much in the same way as the plastic does. So take your brush, dip it into the paint, blot off the excess onto a paper towel, and then just drag it across your wrist. And if you see the texture come out and it's something where you're not seeing the paint going into the grooves and the lines of your skin, that means that's just the right amount of paint. If you see that happening where the paint is going in deeper, that means there's too much paint on your brush and you need to blot off some more of the paint before moving over to the miniature. Now, yes, people do recommend you can do it onto a textured paper towel as well. However, I have found that sometimes the paper towel will absorb more paint, so you don't realize that there's actually still too much paint on that brush when you go and move it over to the miniature. Just something to keep in mind. Let's get going with this process though. Going in with silver, I created a pearlized effect on the cube by dry brushing over the texture very lightly. A little goes a very long way. This is almost a white metallic, so follow suit with a very light metallic from your own collection if you do not have this particular paint. It's important to be sure to use a larger flat brush on the cube. If you go to something smaller, it's not going to sweep across the texture as effectively, and if anything, it's going to load more paint where you may not want it, so larger brush in this case is definitely better. Focus on the edges of the gelatinous cube to really make them pop, but just lightly sweep over the sides. If you go too strongly in with this paint, you won't be able to see into the cube when you are done. Once finished, you're going to have something of a pearlescent appearance to the surface of the cube. Now that you've finished dry brushing on the cube itself, we're going to move into a smaller area, and that is going to be on the details of your insert. This also means let's jump down to a smaller flat brush and just be a little bit more careful with those sweeping motions. They're going to be more controlled. You're not going to drag it all the way across the miniature. You're going to keep it focused on the rib cages, on the skulls, on the bones, and on the bits of weapons that are floating in the plumes of the inside of our gelatinous cube. I'm using Bonewhite, which is an ivory color, to enhance the detail of all the little bits in the insert. This means the bones, the skulls, as well as the weapons. With a small flat brush, I first get the details of the skeletons, making sure to pull the brush across the grain of the details to really get them to pop. So if you're working with the rib cage, basically pull either from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, working across the ribs. Same thing with the skull. You want to pull that brush either from the top of the brow down or from the jaw up. Then when there is very little paint left on the brush, what I do is go over to the weapons and just do a very light dry brush over those just to bring out those little bits of texture like the dents in the shield and the edges of the blades. And when you're done, you should have something that looks like this. Almost done, but we do need to be sure the paint's dry on the insert before moving on. So it's time to take a break. Make sure to get up, stretch, move around, and come back in about 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to be jumping back into doing more wash. This time it's more concentrated and more controlled because of the area in which we're applying it. So please be sure you're moving to a smaller round brush first of all. That's your first tip. Second tip is if for some reason you find that you do have too much wash on your brush where you're going to apply the wash, whether it's on a rib cage or in the skull, and you see that it starts to puddle and bleed off to an area you don't want it to go, simply take your brush, blot it quickly onto a paper towel to remove any excess wash that's already on the brush, then take the tip of your brush and put it into that puddle that is starting to develop on the miniature. And the brush itself will start wicking away the excess wash. So that's something else you can do if you find, oops, I've had a little bit more wash on my brush than I needed. So just start off with a little bit on the brush and then apply a little bit more as you go along. That's the nice thing about washes is you can keep layering them as you've already seen throughout the process of this tutorial. Let's keep going. Going in with Umber, which is a brown wash, apply this carefully to all the details in the insert. You especially want to be sure to get this into the sockets of the skulls and the gaps between the ribs of the rib cages. Once you apply this to all the details, set the insert aside to dry. While the insert dries, the cube is ready for its second round of a gloss coat. This is going to further add to the translucent appearance and give the mini a little bit more protection in the long run. You do not want to skip this step. Do this step. This step is important. Again, do this step. So you're going to go back to that large flat brush and apply it to the cube surface area. This means the top and the sides as well as the edges and the corners. Once you have it covered entirely, place it to the side and allow it to dry fully before handling it. Before you put the gloss away, don't forget about the insert. Now's the time to get that sealed up as well and get rid of the dulled look left from the washes. Go in and be sure to coat both the inside and the outside surfaces of the insert. If you don't, it will still be more muted. As you go along, you can even see the transformation between the more dulled look and the brightened gloss coat areas. Like the gelatinous cube, put this aside to dry, and don't touch it. Not until it's dry at least. If you've hit this point of the video, that means you've just completed your miniature and you've applied that seal coat. Please be sure you let that dry before you start handling it because you really can muck it up if you start handling it before it's truly dry. And you don't want to compromise all your hard work, do you? There is one last step left for you, and you can take that black disc that is included in the packaging and apply it to the insert. You're going to glue the insert to the disc. You're not going to glue the cube to the disc because you want to have the ability to separate the cube from the insert, because the cool thing about that cube, and this isn't speaking from experience at all, you can take that and you can put it over PC miniatures on the table so that, you know, oopsie, you got eaten by the gelatinous cube. So just be sure when you are going to apply things to the base that it's just the insert, and you want to be sure you are using super glue. Classic super glue. Brand-wise doesn't matter, it's just avoid any gel-based glues that are saying, hey, great bonding. Yeah, they're great, but they also have some issues when they dry. They can cloud up, they're actually more brittle, and I find the bond isn't as secure. So I always recommend when you go to glue your miniatures to the bases that are provided in the packaging that you use just a classic super glue, liquid, no gel. Stay away from gel. Thank you so much for joining me for the WizKids D&D Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures Gelatinous Cube Take and Paint tutorial. I very much enjoyed sharing these tips and tricks with you, and I hope that they prove to be handy for you in your future miniature painting. We always love seeing what people do out there with the miniatures, so be sure to get onto your socials, use that hashtag WKTakeLetterNPaint, and tag us at WizKidsGames. You need to make sure that's in there, and that you can do on Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. So get on out there, share your work, spread the love. It's always fun to see. Wrapping things up, I just want to make sure I say thank you so much to our host or hostess for running this event for you. And everyone, please stay safe, and we'll see you on the flip side. Until then, bye.